Back in 2009, Disney sought to revive their hand-drawn animation department with a fairy tale set in New Orleans and with their usual array of talking animals and catchy songs. That movie was The Princess and the Frog, and it actually stands as one of my favorite Disney animated features. Directed by Ron Clements and John Musker, it managed to create something enchanting and charming, and all these years later, it remains a delight. But what is it about this animated film that works so well? One of the principal reasons is its lead protagonist, Tiana, who has her own unique personality that allows her to stand out from other Disney heroines. She's someone with a dream of starting her own restaurant and is determined to make that possible. She seeks to work hard, and the filmmakers did a nice job of showing her penchant for putting everything into her work while making her a sympathetic character just trying to get by. That all this is inspired by her father and his wish to make sure everyone had a good meal is particularly heartwarming. While the film addresses how she puts work above everything else, they don't turn her into a stick in the mud, as she's dismissively called at one point. Anika Noni Rose did a superb job of voicing Tiana, making her likable and charming, and showing her intelligence. Meanwhile, Tiana's love for cooking is tied into the film being set in New Orleans, and the movie takes full advantage of the location. It's not just there for window dressing. It actually plays a pivotal role in the story and the characters, and presented a different fairy tale setting than the European locales common in Disney's animated fairy tales. The city streets feel alive, and the bayou is especially beautiful, with all the greens and other flora. In addition to Tiana, the other characters leave an impression too. Naveen immediately became one of the most memorable Disney princes, with his suave attitude and excitement of being in New Orleans, but he's also someone willing to take the easy way out. Bruno Campos brought the necessary charm to the role, but also more than handles the moments where Naveen gets self-reflective. His romance with Tiana is nicely developed through their journey, and it's believable seeing it blossom. Dr. Facilier becomes a highly entertaining villain, one who will stop at nothing to take over New Orleans. Keith David was an excellent casting choice, and Bruce W. Smith's animation is some of the finest in the movie as he moves like Cab Calloway. Him achieving his goals through persuasion and trying to tap into people's desires is a clever touch, but he's also indebted to his friends on the other side. So while he gives this air of being in control, he secretly knows that the otherworldly beings he has gained magical abilities from could turn at any second. You could even interpret them as waiting for the opportune time for things to backfire on Facilier. Meanwhile, the animal friends Tiana and Naveen meet along the way are a delightful bunch. Ray the Firefly, being depicted as this romantic with a love for a star in the night sky, added a sweetness underneath his loud personality, and it's wonderful seeing his support for his two newly turned frog friends. Jim Cummings' vocal performance adds a lot to Ray's likability, and I think he delivered one of the best performances of his long career. There's also Louis the Alligator, animated with the expected energy by Eric Goldberg, and it's nice seeing how he bonds with them. Naveen for his love of jazz, and Tiana for their similar appetite for New Orleans cuisine. I also just find the sight of an alligator playing a trumpet to be incredibly amusing. Fun fact, Louis's trumpet playing was done by Terence Blanchard, who is Spike Lee's frequent composer. Mama Odie serves a unique twist on the fairy godmother figure, with her displaying a lot of spunk as she helps Tiana and Naveen go down the correct path. One of the standout characters is Charlotte. Her support for Tiana is wonderful, and despite her focus on wanting to marry a prince and live some fairy tale life, she still wants her best friend to be happy. Stage actress Jennifer Cody, who provided the voice of Charlotte, even won a well-deserved Annie Award for her energetic performance. In an early version of the film, Tiana was going to be Charlotte's maid, but this was thankfully changed, and despite their different societal classes, she nonetheless views Tiana as an equal. Randy Newman was hired to write the songs, and he was a perfect choice for the film. And not just because he's one of my favorite songwriters. His style fits the 1920s jazz era setting, and Newman even spent several years in New Orleans, so he had a familiarity with the culture. He put together an excellent collection of songs. Down in New Orleans becomes a great way to introduce us to the city and Tiana's day-to-day life, along with everyone else in town. Almost There serves as Tiana's I Want song, a peppy number accompanied by a beautifully animated sequence depicting her vision for a restaurant. Friends on the Other Side becomes a classic Disney villain song with great use of Keith David's vocals, as well as that of the shadows echoing through his shop. When We Human is an incredibly catchy tune that perfectly captures the setting as Tiana, Naveen, and Louis sail through the bayou, while Ma Belle Evangeline is a touching love song wonderfully sung by Jim Cummings to the shooting star, but also nicely fitting Tiana and Naveen's romance. My favorite song on the soundtrack, though, is Dig a Little Deeper, an energetic gospel number sung by Mama Odie. In addition to being memorable, all these songs provide important development for the characters, with Clements and Musker giving them the appropriate accompanying images. They have always excelled at directing the musical numbers in their animated films, going as far back as The Great Mouse Detective, taking full advantage of what animation is capable of, and Randy Newman certainly gave them a lot to work with. The way The Princess and the Frog plays around with the fairy tale while still honoring those traditions also adds to its appeal. Obviously, there's the twist on the Frog Prince story, but also how it takes those aspects that began in European storytelling and translating them to an American setting. I particularly love how the film creates its own rules and fairytale logic for the magic spell that turns Tiana and Naveen into frogs. After all, classic fairy tales like Snow White and Sleeping Beauty have specific time frames and actions that need to be done for a spell to be broken, so it makes sense for this one to do it too. They even tailor it to New Orleans, with a Mardi Gras celebration becoming pivotal to breaking the spell at one point. Of course, one of the things that received a lot of attention upon the movie's release was Tiana's race and how black culture would be significant to the story. And despite memes like this that you see on the internet these days, I absolutely remember people back in 2009 who complained they only made her black to fill a quota and that Disney just did it for diversity points. According to Clements and Musker, they chose to set the film in New Orleans first, and with the city's large black population, it made sense for the lead heroine to be black. Tiana was even partly based on a real person, a chef named Leah Chase who lived in New Orleans and was known as the Queen of Creole cuisine. Of course, being set in the Deep South in the 1920s, it's unavoidable the movie would have to address racial issues of the time. And while no, it's not a deep exploration into the prejudice and treatment of black people during that period, it does still address it in certain ways. One of the most notable examples is Tiana being denied her restaurant even after making enough money to afford it. The realtors say it's because of her background, showing they don't think a black woman should have her own establishment, which is what then leads to her coming across Naveen later. The film also shows the segregation at the time, with Tiana and a family living in smaller houses with other black people, away from the bigger homes owned by white people. This even ties into the way Charlotte and Tiana view fairy tales and wishing stars. Charlotte, despite already living a privileged life by having a wealthy father and living in a giant mansion with everything she could ask for, still wishes upon her star to get even more, while Tiana is less believing in them because of the hardship she has faced as a segregated black American and her long journey to making enough money to afford her restaurant. So even though The Princess and the Frog does take historical liberties for the sake of being a Disney fairy tale for families, you can tell those issues were on the minds of the filmmakers when they made the movie. One criticism that's been leveled at the movie since its release has been the decision to turn Tiana into a frog for most of the runtime, and I do think that's a valid one, mainly because it has become a strange trend in animation lately to have characters of color transformed into something else for much of the movie. It happened to the protagonist of Soul and Spies in Disguise, and even preceding The Prince of the Frog, there was Brother Bear, which was about an indigenous man who turns into a bear. Now, I don't think the intent of doing this was malicious, but it's certainly odd this has happened in enough animated films that's become a pattern. I completely understand why it's bothered some, and it would be good to see more animated films, like the Spider-Verse films, where characters of color retain their appearance through the entire story. Of course, one of the other significant aspects of the film was Disney using it to try and revive the hand-drawn animation department. There was a hope this would herald a new era, with several of the animators who had left the studio coming back for this movie, and hopefully many more. And they did a splendid job, because this is a beautiful looking film. The backgrounds have a lot of charm and detail to them, and the character animation particularly pops. Each animator was assigned a character that matched their talents, most notably Mark Henn, with Tiana being one of several Disney heroines he served as a supervising animator on. It was wonderful seeing this movie in the theater, and I had the biggest smile on my face seeing this gorgeous hand-drawn animated movie projected on the big screen. However, while the movie did pull in a decent profit at the box office, it was not quite on par with how Disney thought it would perform. They predicted this movie would be a ginormous smash, but I think the expectations were too high for a number of reasons. Chief among them was the reputation of Walt Disney Animation Studios at the time. The Princess and the Frog was the last movie in a rocky decade for the studio, and they were not pulling in the same grosses that movies from Pixar and DreamWorks were. Among the hand-drawn movies of the 2000s, The Prince and the Frog performed about the same as Lilo and Stitch 7 years earlier, and about $20 million higher than Brother Bear. Even their computer-animated films tend to do respectable numbers, but nothing spectacular. Bolt and Chicken Little made around $310 to $315 million, which was not that much more than The Princess and the Frog. It's easy to forget that movies like Chicken Little and Home on the Range were still a recent memory in 2009, and Disney Animation was viewed as Pixar's less cool cousin. That was the biggest hurdle I personally faced, trying to convince people that yes, this movie is actually great. The movie would end up selling extremely well on video, and I do think the more people catching up with it, and that goodwill, helped a lot in making Tangled Disney Animation's most successful movie in years. There were other decisions Disney made that affected its box office. One of them was naming the movie The Princess and the Frog. Disney spent the past decade treating their princess characters as something exclusively for girls, with a marketing line that favored dolls and the color pink. So it makes sense why putting princess in the title would make boys think it was just a girly movie, no matter how hard they emphasize the talking frog and stylish villain in the marketing. That title is not even that accurate, because Tiana does not become a princess until the very end of the movie. Disney's release scheduling was oh so odd. Normally they put that biggest holiday movie on American Thanksgiving, which has proven successful for them many times. The Princess and the Frog would have been very fitting there. However, they decided to give that spot to Old Dogs. They could have released that any time of year, but for some reason felt this prime spot would make more sense for this lowbrow comedy than one of their major animated films. The Princess and the Frog was instead given a limited release on Thanksgiving and expanded right before the Christmas rush of big movies. But like I said, even with those issues, the film still did solid enough. I just don't know why Disney expected Pixar numbers. To this day, I still think they gave up on hand-drawn animation too easily, and that John Lasseter should have fought harder for it. There's even a behind-the-scenes featurette where the animators talk about how excited they are to make another hand-drawn film at Disney, and it's heartbreaking knowing they would only get to make one more after this. However, it's touching that The Princess and the Frog remains fondly remembered by many, and Tiana would even become one of the most popular characters in the Disney Princess lineup. She would also receive her own theme park attraction with Tiana's Bayou Adventure, and just a short walk from it in New Orleans Square at Disneyland, you can even eat at Tiana's restaurant. For a while, there was also development of a series for Disney Plus that would have continued her adventures. This was first announced in December 2020, and then we waited and waited and waited. It was eventually revealed last month the series would not be going forward, which was not too surprising considering the lack of updates. This was certainly disappointing, with Anika Noni Rose being particularly upset about it, but it looks like they are now working on a Disney Plus special, so hopefully it actually does reach out screens. Nonetheless, it's nice to see Disney still sees value in The Princess and the Frog after all these years. I still think it's one of the best animated films, with its great ensemble of characters, its imaginative story, the delightful songs, winning humor, and touching romance. It checks off all the boxes for me, and is a movie I do often go back to on occasion. See you next time.